Bonjour, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you for this talk, which I had an absolute blast preparing. Build your entire animation workflow in Unreal Engine. And the goal today is to show you all the tools available for you to go from a static mesh all the way down to the final animation in Sequencer without ever leaving the engine. Yeah, that's possible now. I'm Stéphane, a solution architect at Epic Games, focusing on animation and rigging. And I spend most of my time working with professionals, helping them find solutions and adopt our tools as effectively as possible. Let's take a look at today's agenda. And to keep it simple, as I mentioned, starting from a static mesh, we will go to skeletal mesh down to animation in Sequencer, and we're going to bridge everything, connecting dots, to rigging with Control Rig and also Deformers. First, because I love that, and then because I'm sure that's going to be interesting for you, really interesting. And then we will finish with what's coming next and other tools that I wanted to give you like a quick overview, because I think it's going to be really interesting as well for animation and brings new things that I'm sure you're going to love. And for this, I'm happy to present you a brand new character I really enjoy building and creating, which is Droid-Oh. Thanks to Matt Thorpe at Epix, who is a senior character artist that helped me a lot, and my lead, Juan Gomez, as well. I needed some feedback to keep it simple but right. And he's going to help us demonstrating and showcasing all the things we need and all the tips I'm going to share with you as well. So before jumping into animation, we need to master important steps, which is skeleton creation, skinning, and of course, controlling. So let's start with the beginning and starting from a static mesh to a skeletal mesh. This is possible now with a plugin that's enabled by default, which is a skeletal mesh editing tools. And it's really simple. With just a right click in the content browser, you can turn your static mesh into a skeletal mesh. I made a quick video presenting you the little workflow here. So as you can see, from a right click, you can adjust naming convention and you will end up with two assets, skeletal and a skeleton. You will have by default a root bone, and then through the editing tools that's enabled by default, you can start editing and creating your joints in Unreal. I would say joints and bones, but you got me, kind of the same thing, but yeah. So we have a bunch of tools available for you to ease the process. And for example, here, based on the topology and shape of your mesh, you can easily select edge loops and just snap your bones the way you want. You can base your creation from the camera, plane camera, or from the volume of the mesh. And if you have like simple geometry, kind of repetitive one here, as you can see on the leg of Droid-Oh, it's quite simple and straightforward to build everything. Don't forget that you can also optimize and customize your UI and bringing another viewport and having one orthographic view and one perspective. So I spare you the entire creation of the skeleton of Droid-Oh because it's going to be quite long, but this is a quick overview and quick look at the final skeleton I created in Unreal. And one of the things that's really cool with the skeletal mesh asset and editor is that you can, for example, copy paste an existing skeleton structure from one mesh to another. So for example, for Droid-Oh, I could use Mani skeleton, and I'll just have to replace and adjust everything. So that's really cool and powerful as well. And inside the skeletal mesh editor, we also have few tools that will help the entire process. And you won't have to create scripts or other plugins compared to other DCC. It's all there for you. Even for example, I took the example of the joints orientation. It's all there and quite straightforward, whether you want an automatic adjustment or manual one. And same for symmetry, reparent, and more. Other tips I wanted to share with you, it's a simple but little one. It's a kind of a really game changer, I would say, but it will save you a lot of time. It's just like if you press F2 on one parent and click on the child, it will just incrementally pass the name. So if like a long chain, it's quite easy to rename everything. Same with a batch rename using hashtag. It's quite straightforward and really helpful. And talking about tips, I wanted also to talk about this display that you might encounter if you're playing a bit with the skeletal mesh editor. That's normal to see the bulleted joints even if you want to delete them. For example, you got one joint that you want to delete in the editor, and then when you hit accept, you will still see them like that. That's normal because most of the time, one skeleton can be shared across different assets or skeletal mesh. So you can adjust the display here through the gear icon and show only the skeleton structure used for this asset. So once all the skeleton structure is on spot, you can move to skinning through all the tools we provided here, sticking to the skeletal mesh editor. And you can start with an automatic skin assignment through the bind skin feature. You have like two main type of binding, one through direct distance and one through kind of a voxel type. So it works great on repetitive and kind of simple shape like the arm or the leg of Droid-Oh. But you can further adjust that, of course, with a bunch of different tools that you can use to adjust the skin, fluids, growth selection, etc. And shortly, I'm going to show you another example where I really show the process of creating a kind of a skin at the back of the Droid-Oh body. Just wanted also to talk about something that might be a bit confusing when you first start skinning in Unreal, is that by default, Unreal will normalize vertices. So in the end, it's great because you have, like in one go, all the vertices and bones influence in one panel. So a bit of time to get used to it, but in the end, I found it really effective. And you will find as well all the other tools like paint tool. As I mentioned, like you can base your skinning on a selection, and you have everything you need to really be comfortable when you try to skin in Unreal. You need a lot of patience during this step, of course. I know that you love this step like I do. And then I wanted to talk about other things in the Skeletal Mesh Editor plugin and through the skin tool here, feature, is that you can also create what we call attributes. And this is something I did for our friend Droid-Oh here. I'll show you like a quick workflow here when you start by creating a weight map layer. So I just take the example here on the front flap. And through attributes, you can specify area or really specific part of the mesh that you can reuse for different scenarios. And here, I will use attributes for deformers. So after creating one attribute, I will just paint the area I want. So this is just an example with the front flap. And then I did the same with the head. The head will be used for a squash and stretch deformer afterwards. And it is the entire process because you just have to reference these new attributes in Control Rig, and you have like a specific area region you want to use. But pay attention, as we love in Unreal, to these little checkboxes, of course. If you really want to use and want it to be really effective, you will need to enable this little attribute here under the vertex attribute section. It's all in Skeletal Mesh Editor under the asset details. Another thing that's really important, and maybe some of you not aware of that, but you can do layer skin or having like multiple profile in skin with the skinning in Unreal. For example, here, Droid-Oh has the main skin layer I did earlier, and I wanted to focus on the back flap of his body. The back flap will follow the spine, but what if I want to open it? I would add some extra logic here. And this is where I create a new layer to get the joint of the back flap and add this opportunity and this possibility of opening it afterwards. And the game here will be to use both skin profile at the same time. So this is also where I show you a quick example on how to skin in Unreal with the Skeletal Mesh editor. So after creating the second profile, I will just respecify it here under the skin weight layer section. And then it's just a matter of adjusting the weight. So what's cool here with Droid-Oh is that he has like separated pieces on his body. It's not all merged. So you can start with a quick brush paint where you want, and then you'll see through a selection feature, you can easily grow the selection and affect these particular parts without having to struggle trying to paint inside the mesh, etc. So that's really cool to use and quite straightforward and simple. So I do that for the back flap and also for the little cylinder mechanism. So that's the setup. And then you'll see that I'm going to reuse that, as I said, in Control Rig using Deformer. I will guide you through a complete and effective workflow on how to do that in depth, but I just wanted to give you like a quick overview here and the final results. So here in Control Rig, as I mentioned, this is the default skin layer used on this body. So this is the basic behavior, but now, thanks to this new profile skin I created, I can open the back flap. So I'm using 2 skin layers in the same time. And this is possible thanks to the dual linear bind skin deformer that's already there in the content engine content, and you can use it here. So now it's time to rig it like a pro using Control Rig. I love that part. So I got like tons of tips for you guys. So Control Rig is based on events, and 3 main ones. The construction event, this is where you build your base logic. You can, for example, dynamically spawn new controls and more. I'm going to show you that. Forward solve is the main event where you build the core logic. So FK, IK solvers, constraint, etc. And then we got this little, might be difficult one, backward solve. That's really important if you, for example, want to bring already existing animation data and want to adjust that in the sequencer. So we're going to cover 3 of them, all the 3 of them right now, starting with the construction event. And here I've got a little example of what I did on Droid-Oh. Like, for example, I can automatically colorize the controls. I also put in place a little function to use control rig physics. This is something we're going to talk about just after. And for example, with the construction events, the 4 nodes you see at the bottom is used to, by default, open the eyelids of Droid-Oh. So by default, in the T-pose, you see that he has the closed eyes. Using the construction event, I can give it like another default pose. So you can drive controls or bones there directly. This is another example just based on the left leg of Droid-Oh, where using this little setup, I dynamically spawn the controls and respect the hierarchy of the point structure. Through the function control stack at item, this is an already existing one for you, built for you and available directly in the control rig graph. You can create this setup and you don't have to manually place everything. So that might be, this is really useful if you want a full procedural and dynamic rig. Let's jump into forward solve, where we have the base logic, as I mentioned, FK, IK, and constraints. And I wanted to give you a few examples, but first I wanted to talk about a bit about optimization, because let's take the example of FK solvers, the more simple one. For example, you can start with the get and set transform. This is the basic setup, I would say. But if you do that on each bone, it's going to be quite repetitive. So it won't be really optimized in terms of pure optimization, but even like visually. So one thing you can do is use this magic and wonderful node called for each. So you will loop through all the items you want to define, and it will simplify everything. And if you want to go even deeper, you can turn that into a function. Smart, optimized, and you've got also a lot of function already available for you, like this FK chain, where you've got everything packed, and you just have to reuse it and specify bounds and controls. Another example I wanted to show you is the morph target setup. I often see that kind of setup where you get a lot of repetitive stuff. In the end, that could be fine, because when I start my control rig, it's always a mess. That's normal. You try to figure out things. But then when it comes to organize a bit everything, this is where you can leverage the use of the functions in Unreal. So everything you see here can be summarized into one function, this little one. Quite simple and straightforward. And this is the setup here of this function, where I loop through all the curves item that I can find in my mesh, my rig. And then I just, through a concat node, add a prefix. And as you can imagine, it's all really heavily depending on the naming convention of the mesh you have. And then I just set the curve value. And the curve, this is where I will retrieve the morph target data. After that, because we are talking about morph targets, I wanted to talk about a bit about animation, facial animation on our buddy here, Droid-Oh. So it's heavily based on morph targets, and it's all really nested in one control, which is the head control. And I just specify animation, float animation channel here. You can have a board, a facial board like MetaHuman as well, depending on how you feel with it. You can also have an editor utility widget to have an anim picker and pack everything here. But mainly here it's just using morph targets and playing with the animation channel. And in addition to that, I gave also bond controls on Droid-Oh, where you can trigger one morph target and also play with the bones. So it will give you extra flexibility, and you can use both, whether manually or with advanced logic that I'm going to show you shortly. Most of the morph targets I did on Droid-Oh was made through the skeletal mesh morph. That's a long one. Skeletal mesh morph target editing tools plugin. And same, you don't have to leave the engine now. You can build your morph targets directly in Unreal Engine. You're using kind of the same tools you will retrieve in the modeling mod. So it's all there for you, ready to be used. And even if you want to further adjust without having to re-import, re-export the thing, you can just recreate new ones directly from there. Another thing I found recently that was really powerful, because our buddy Droid-Oh has like a big and large mouth. So when I was playing with some of the morph targets I did, I started to have those little stretches. And this is where you can leverage the use of deformers through the this one, the linear blend skin morph cloth deformer. It will kind of recompute normals and smooth the linear interpolation. And as you can see on the bottom right side, it has like a better and smooth animation here. So this is about facial rigging, but I also wanted to talk about other topic that I really love to implement in my rig. For example, control rig physics. This is new on 5.6, and we will keep continually improving the tools here. So it's based on a plugin called Physics Control. I guess it's going to be now Control Rig Physics soon. And it's just bringing all the physics engine we have into nodes in Control Rig. So you can add it in an existing Control Rig. Of course, this is what I did with Droid-Oh for his little antenna. But you can also build another Control Rig like here. And I started to play with that because all the things you see here could be baked, reused, and adjusted afterwards. So that's really powerful. You can adjust kinematic and dynamic bounds, and you will be able to really play with collision on the mesh itself. So it's not really reacting with world collision at the moment, but I mean, you can start to have really, really good results. This is what it looks like in Control Rig. So as I mentioned, defining some of the kinematic and dynamic bounds. So kinematic will be more like fixed bounds, not simulated, and dynamic will be the one that will receive the simulation. So I'm using a few nodes here in the function that I will reuse and define in my mesh. But if you want even more information, I highly recommend the talk of my friend Danny, who is in charge of all this magic happening in Control Rig. So it's tomorrow at 4 p.m. at room 5. So don't hesitate to check it out. You will now learn a lot of things. Other little example on the forward solve I wanted to show you is the possibility to add, in addition to IK, FK control, ribbon controls as well. So I did this setup based on the work of one of our senior tech anim with Jérémy Passerin. And I wanted to understand what's going on here. And it's heavily based on chain and finding the mid item of this chain and playing with a chain node. And you can have these nice results and really play with a nice deformation without relying on really complex rigging or deformers. So mainly based on the spline form point node, and you can iterate and have like good setup here in addition to the FK and IK. Moving forward, I wanted to talk about RBF, interpolation, and corrective bounds. So in Unreal, you can manage that through animation blueprints and Control Rig. So the two nodes you see on the left here, the bound-driven controller and pose driver, are managed through animation blueprints. The bound-driven controller will be a node used, for example, to trigger a morph target or another bound based on the transform of the first parent bound. This is the typical scenario with MetaHuman. So for example, you can drive wrinkle maps, because wrinkle maps can be morph target. Morph target could be vertices-based or material-based. And as soon as I, for example, play on the rotation of the jawbone, it will trigger morph targets. But that's possible through this node, sorry. And then we have also the pose driver, which is relying on the pose assets. And this is typically RBF interpolation. You will define an angle from start, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, for example, and then you will be able to trigger those steps with a basic RBF interpolation system. But you can manage almost everything directly in Control Rig through this spherical pose reader node. This is quite straightforward to use. It will output a weight value that you can reuse to set the control and the part you want. Here, for example, with the Droid-Oh, I wanted to play with the pad shoulder area. And as soon as I will play with the arm, I wanted it to follow correctly. So this is a setup I did without relying on animation problems, but just on Control Rig. And using the spherical pose reader, I just have to play with the control rotation and add an offset, just trying to find the correct angle. And then you're good to go, and you can have like kind of automatic behavior happening in your Control Rig without heavy setup. Then let's talk about backward solve. So it's not mandatory if you are using like classic animation and you're animating all in Unreal, but it's mandatory if you are importing animation from another DCC or if you are using, for example, motion capture. So just a few examples on how to set Control Rig, backwards solve event, sorry. On the top left, you have the FK solver that I just inverted in order to create the backward solve here. So you can, I just created a function for the main forward solve here with the FK solver with the get array transform and set array transform. As you can see, I just inverted the input, and then it's now from the bounds transform that we set our controls, not the inverse. At the bottom, you see an IK setup that you can use for backward solve. It's all relying on project to new parent nodes. So based on the controls and the bounds that the control will drive, you just inverse the logic here. And same with another example here. This is for the eyeboard control. Using project to new parent node and interpolation nodes between the two eyes, you can retrieve the exact position of the eyes and then retrieve your controls and adjust your animation. So to illustrate that, I get a fancy animation on Droid-Oh that I retrieve on my computer. So there's a lot of things to adjust here, and that's where backward solve come in place. So at any moment, you can pause your animation and just bring your Control Rig. It's not just in an additive way, it's really solving in backwards what you've got here. You can bake and use your Control Rig, but you can also leverage the layered Control Rig feature, which is here since 5.4. Meaning that dynamically I can adjust everything. And for instance, I could add another animation in the animation track without having a destructive workflow. So that's really, really powerful. And as you can see here, you can adjust on all the animation. You can also put some keys here. And actually, we have the voice-to-visual workshop where we are demonstrating and showcasing that in live with our characters. So feel free to come and join afterwards. You will know in depth what's going on here without relying just on a video. We talk about Control Rig, then we can step into Modular Control Rig a bit, knowing that Control Rig will be like really for the complete control, you build everything from scratch. Then you have Modular Control Rig that you can reuse, and it's more like a user-friendly approach of rigging if you're not really comfortable with rigging. And it's all based on modules that you can use, and we have like a bunch of modules already available for you in the engine, and you can also create your own. And this is an example of Droid-Oh here using Modular Control Rig. So I set up a quick Modular Control Rig here, where you can have like basic FK system and IK1, and it's built with a lot of functionality and attributes that you can play with. For example, here on the arms or the leg, you can enable the pole vector follow, meaning that you don't have to build yourself a complex setup to bring the pole vector and make it follow the IK chain. So that's kind of smart and useful. And Also, as you can see, we have different modules available. And for example, I put one, which is the wheel module on the foot of Droid-Oh. And as soon as I'm moving forward, backwards, you will see the wheel in action. So it's just literally just a drag and drop on your character based on sockets that you can see the little white dots. And you can manage a lot of cool things without having to dive into the graph. So you have to find a good balance here, because here you can really go, I would say, fast with a rig, because you just have to drag and drop. But when it comes to create your modules, this is why it might be a bit more complex if you're not familiar with a control rig. So you have to find the good balance, and my advice would be to really start with control rig and understand a bit things and what's going on. And then, as you can see, you can just dive in the content, engine content, and just check out how a module is built. And it's mainly and heavily based on what we call metadata, where you create and store information and reuse them elsewhere in the graph. So it's a bit more advanced. And this is all about iteration and creating variants of your rig. And this is why I wanted to highlight 3 main ways of creating variants and iteration of your control rig. So let's say you build one control rig, you spend like a lot of time on it, and you want to reuse that for another character. You have 3 main ways of dealing and handling that. The first one way, which is the most simple one, is using function. You can use function and export them as a public function, for example, and reuse them across control rig assets. The second layer is using modular control rig, where you can get your module and build your own module. It's a bit more complex. And then you can have the data-driven rigging. This is based on data assets, and you're just exposing attributes, for example, or specific features that you want to enable or not on another mesh. Let's say, do you want it to have like 2 legs or 4 legs, etc. So it's full procedural and dynamic, so it's a bit more complex. I won't dive into that in depth, but I can recommend you the talk of last year from one of our senior tech anim, which is Matt Ringo. And he did this excellent talk, so I invite you to scan this little QR code and save it for later. He explaining in depth what's going on with different setup and mainly with the data-driven approach. So it's really cool, and I highly recommend it. So now let's jump into Deformers, and I wanted to share a lot of things with you, because it might not be clear, and I wanted to give you like an actual state of what's going on and how to use Deformers in Unreal. You have 2 main ways of using Deformers. The first one, which is really more friendly and I would say stable and really effective, is the use of Deformers in Sequencer. And then I wanted to show you how to use Deformers directly through Control Rig. It's a bit more of a process, but stick with me, I'm going to show you everything. So first, using Sequencer, on any skeletal mesh you have on your scene, you can bring a deformer, and we have like a lattice, scope deformer one as well. We can inflate or deflate your mesh. It's available as soon as you turn on the Animator Kit plugin, and then you just have to call it and place it wherever you want. You can also at some point parent the deformer to some bone, but you need to pay attention to the spaces and make it like makes the same space parent same space as your bone. Otherwise, you can have like weird results. So it's just a matter of placing the deformer and just playing with some of the things you have here. As soon as you select one little subdivision, it will give you an extra dynamic control to drive all at once. And the other thing that's also, of course, really great, it's that you cannot just rely on one deformer. You can have several ones. And you can also add your main control rig as well. So this is what I'm doing here. And I retrieve my full control rig in addition to the lattice one. So this is the sequencer approach. Let's dive into a bit more complex one, using deformers in control rig. So first you need a deformer graph. It's where you create what we call your kernel nodes with some HLSL coding. And the game here will be to expose attributes to reuse them in Control Rig. So it's a bit of a process. So let me explain a bit in depth. Here, you will need 4 main assets. First, the deformer graph. You can create your own. It's a bit more complex, but we have like several ones that you can use and leverage like you want. You will still have, of course, the need of your existing control rig. Then you will need a secondary control rig. This is where you will reference directly your deformer graph. And then you will need an animation blueprint to bridge everything. And this is important in order to retrieve your animation if at some point you want to bake the animation you made. If you don't have this animation blueprint connecting dots, you will lose the animation made through deformers. So I made a long video here, so I probably fast forward a bit, but this is Droid-Oh strangling to activate his little deformer. So this is the squash and stretch I did here based on the attributes we created earlier through the skeletal mesh plugin. And as you can see here on the right-hand side, I've got attributes that I've exposed that I can use in real time for our buddy here, Droid-Oh. So it's a squash and stretch. I can use and define the length. I can activate also a debug mode, which is the integer value at the bottom here. And let me guide you through the process here of what I did and the entire workflow, because I'm showcasing maybe a bit too much Droid-Oh squashing here. So we will start with the skeletal mesh, because this is important. You need to specify your control rig and the animation blueprint. Like that, as soon as you will drag and drop your mesh, it will automatically connect and link the control rig you use and the animation blueprints you want to use. This is the main control rig that I am using here for the skeletal mesh. This is not the secondary one that I'm going to show in a bit. So then, after that, we can jump into the animation blueprint here. And inside, it's a simple setup with the control rig node. You just have to specify here, not the main control rig, but the secondary one. Because this is where, in this secondary control rig, you will specify the reference, the direct reference of the deformer graph. So you just have to specify that in the animation blueprints. Then in the secondary control rig, you just have to specify and reference your deformers, as I mentioned, through this add deformer node. And here, as soon as you reference a deformer graph, just don't forget to right-click and refresh the attributes, and you can see at the bottom part, you see the layer profile. This is the attribute layer I'm referencing. And you can execute multiple deformer, meaning that you can have different layers of deformer working in the same time. And then the last part is just connecting everything in the control rig. I just wanted to give you also a little quick heads up here on the deformer graph before that. So this is the deformer graph. This is a deformer already available for you in the engine content. And here I just expose attributes in order to be able to reuse and define them in the control rig. You can see the value here, float type, the name, and then in control rig, so the main one, if I show you here, to the set transform animation attributes or float animation attributes, I can specify the name of the attribute I expose in the deformer graph and just map some logic. For example, here I'm just mapping the head rotation. So my squash and stretch deformer will follow when my head will tilt or rotate a bit. And this is kind of the setup you can use to really drive deformer, inside control rig without having to rely solely on the sequencer use. Another example here, using deformers, for example, on the wheel of our little buddy here, Droid-Oh, you can play with the squash and stretch on the wheel, and based on the distance on 2Control, you can simulate a little fun deformer animation on the wheel without having to manually drive that. That's really fun to play with as well. So that was a big overview of the skeleton creation, skinning creation, control recreation. Now let's dive into animation in context using sequencer. So it happens in sequencer first, because when you first open Unreal, of course, you don't have any like timeline. It's all depending and relying on sequencer assets. And as soon as you are dealing with the sequencer and some control rig, you also have to handle and manage what we call animation mode. So what we call anim in context is that, for example, here's some animation of our little buddy here. You can see all the animation packed into one sequencer. And at any moment, you can visualize everything. And then you can also pause, get out of the camera, and just revisualize a little bit the scene here in real time without having to get into the camera or having just like a not good mode or not. You have like a really the final pixel render view here, which is really good. And you can have all the elements you want when you are managing animation here. So I wanted to talk about the anim mode, because as soon as you click on the control in your control rig, you will be switched to animation mode that you can find at the top left corner here. So the animation mode will bring a lot of tools to ease the process of animation. And you will have, like, on the left-hand side, the animation tab, packing the tools like space switching, pose library, layers, constraints, etc. So in 5.6, we try to revamp the UI and pack everything to make it more lighter. And on the right-hand side, you also have like the outliner with all the controls that you can select and focus on. And then we have the UI packed at the top here with a lot of icons that you can use, like also the selection, the motion trails, etc., etc. On the right-hand side, at the bottom, you have also the anim details. This is where you retrieve your attributes that you mapped into a controller, for example. Don't forget that you can also customize your UI. And just like we did earlier with the skeletal mesh editor, you can have two separate viewports. Don't forget to tick off the allow cinematic control. So when you click on camera cuts, it won't propagate on the other viewports. And this is typical scenario where you are animating, you want your final camera and some flexibility on the other viewports. So that's really cool to use. It's really straightforward. You can save this layout under the Windows tab and just move forward. Also, something kind of mandatory for any animators is the use of the curves editor. It's the little icon you will see here on the top bar of the sequencer. We did a lot of improvements in here, like just not optimization, but also quality of life. Like we added, for example, the lattice tool in order to really manage your curves as you want. We also improved the twins tool. Now you have one twins tool here available directly in sequencer with a range going -1 to 1. You can override that with the little icon on the right to go beyond those values. And you still have the twins tools available at the top left corner under the animation tab here, meaning that you can have two twins tools running in the same time. So that's really cool as well to have. You can have that and play with two different behavior in order to manage and adjust your curves. Oops, sorry. Also, we can adjust everything through anim layers. So pay attention. I just bring that here in purpose because you don't want to mismatch anim layers and layered control rig. This is two different things. This is just purely additive layer of override layer that you can manage in sequencer solely based on the forward solve. Layered control rig is really based and possible through the backward solve, and you don't need layer control rig to create your animation like that. This is like regular layers, and we improve that a lot through a little quality of life. You can now add any controls on the fly. You can play with the weight at any moment. And here was just an example on the hands to create a little slight movement in addition to the main animation. So in addition to all of that, I wanted to share with you little handy tricks that I always use when I'm animating in Unreal. In sequencer, you can filter tracks using the little icons I highlighted on the right. So that's really handy when you want to focus on one leg when you're creating your work cycle, for example. You also have other filters on the left-hand side, just near the Add button, where you can, for example, display only the track that has keys on it. And on the right side with the animators, you can unfold, transform, like, for example, the location. And as soon as you click on one specific axis, this will highlight and isolate the curve with the axis you want. So that's really handy as well, without having to unfold long hierarchy in the sequencer. That's a handy one, the playhead constraints. Keep playhead in playback range while scrubbing. This is important if you don't want your playheads to go out range when you are managing your animation. And same for control rig only, the last one, where you don't have to struggle when you click on your control rig. You can limit the selection to controls. That's really handy as well. Other things that I wanted to show you, it's quite new. We are trying to improve that in the future as well, is now this little icon that's new in Sequencer, which is the Sequencer navigation. And now when you click on that, you can have in one glance all the structure of the sequencer you open. In production, you have, like, for example, one master sequence with tons of subsequences in it, and sometimes it's difficult to know what's going on. So through this little tool now, you can have like one big control board, I would say, and you can visualize what's inside. Other thing that you can handle in Unreal without leaving the engine is the use of editor utility widgets to build a lot of different custom tools. And for example, here you can create an editor utility widget to leverage the use of Anim Picker. This is an early stage of an Anim Picker of our friend Droid-Oh here, but you can create a nice display and bring almost all the logic you can have in Sequencer, like selecting a multiple selection, driving a Boolean value for IK, FK solve, etc. In addition to all of that, just to show you all the things we've done, this is mainly for 5.6, but it's go beyond. It's going to be for 5.7, 5.8 in the sense that we're going to try to improve everything here. Heavily based on your feedback as well. So we're counting on you to test our tools, to animate in engine. That's really important. You are the one that's helping us improve in the best way the tool. So different things that you can see where we try to focus on and add some new things. For example, the control rig physics. So don't hesitate to take a little picture here. So let's take a look at the last part quickly here, which is the future. So it's the future, but I also wanted to highlight other tools here that's really important. For example, the motion design plugin here, available since like few versions now. And I found it like really, really important to use in order to leverage animation. It brings new possibility using different effector, like for example, this little light speed effect. You can add, that could be complex things to do traditionally in Unreal, with just few actors and few new actors, even like for the thruster here and the asteroid belt. So that's really handy, and I highly recommend diving into motion design as well. Other thing that's really, really handy, and that's going to kind of revolutionize the way we see Unreal and animation. We have also the Odyssey plugin, where you can really start even earlier than the static mesh step. You can start with storyboards and early stage mixing 2D and 3D. And you can also go beyond if you want to add some effects during animation with your 3D models. Now Odyssey is native to Unreal, so you will find it in the plugin form directly when you open your engine. So that's also really powerful. And another one is the quick render. Now you can, in just one click, render out your viewports with everything inside based on the camera and the camera viewports. So that's also quite handy. So in terms of the future, we really want to focus on the facial rigging aspect. I don't have any specific features to announce, but just to let you know that we know that it's really a big deal for us and for you. So we want to focus on that as well as much as we can. And on the right side, we have the direct mesh contour that will be available really soon in an experimental way, meaning that just like using polygroups, you can define a selection and you can just drive your mesh without having to rely on controls. So that's also kind of the future, really helpful because sometimes you have too many controls and it might be difficult to handle everything. So direct mesh control is coming, and it's also based on the skeletal mesh editor, and you will be able to create your logic quite easily. So that was it for today. Thanks for your attention. Thank you.